course, during this pandemic, the workplace has become a very different place. For some, it's become an abandoned place. And a lot of people, the workplace is strictly online now. So there's changes going on with workplace culture. Interesting topic here. Joel Patterson's our guest this morning. He heads up the Vested Group. He's a workplace culture analyst. Joel, we appreciate you taking time this morning.
Thanks, Todd. Happy to be here.
Well, I guess the first thing is that the work environment is a sort of a commune when we're all in the office, right? So that changes the way we interact with each other. Now, most of the time, people are interacting with each other over Zoom calls and this sort of thing. So it's changing the interpersonal relationships here, isn't it?
Clearly, yeah, in a lot of ways. And it's really created an environment that you have to start thinking about things that we didn't have to think about before. You would assume that some things like harassment or bullying would kind of go away when you're not in person. But the reality is it's as we've gotten more and more into this, it's starting to pop up a little bit more often because people are still people. And it's very important that employers think about this and how they can protect the other employees to make sure that they're not being harassed and that they have the appropriate values and purpose in place in their organization to hold people accountable to that.
Yeah, Joel, and I think some of this, it's the old adage, we got a keyboard tough guy or tough gal if you want. You're online, you can turn off your camera on your Zoom and you can maybe type things or say things because you have that facade of anonymity or that removal from being right in front of the person. So it leads to more confrontational type of things. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, clearly. And, office conversation is becoming internet conversation, unfortunately. And, early on when the pandemic started, productivity was up and people felt good about it, but the reality is productivity is just kind of one measure of this. And so as you're looking at the rest of the big picture and trying to see what is really going on, you're starting to see that there's more of that kind of subversive activity happening over instant messaging apps like Slack or email. We still don't have a font that is a sarcastic font or sarcastic tone.
Right.
Things like that get really misconstrued. And so you've got to kind of double down because you don't have the opportunity to really see people's body language. You don't really know how they're feeling over Zoom. And so you've got to be able to give them an outlet to reach out if something is going on that needs to be addressed.
Joel Patterson is with us. He's a workplace culture expert, and that's a great line you had, that office conversation is now almost always internet conversation, and we all know what goes on quote-unquote the internet. Social media, things can get Haiti. I've seen it called a curious mix of hyper-engagement with a lack of empathy as well. That sort of sums it up, right?
It really does. And you mentioned empathy. I think companies need to look at their managers and really see how they have developed their skills through this. It used to be that managers would be responsible for auditing expense reports and approving them and things like that. And that's not really the necessary skill right now. It's more about coaching their people, focusing on emotional intelligence, developing talent, making sure you're developing trust with your people. And those are new skills for a lot of organizations and a lot of people in general. So we're really going to have to look at 2021 as a year to invest in those skills, make some decisions around how much working from home you're going to do, and then plan your office rules and criteria accordingly.
Joel Patterson is here. He is with the Vested Group. We're talking about workplace culture and how these virtual meetings have maybe now taken a turn for the worse because people are a lot less civil, and actually harassment and bullying is up. And I guess it's a different sort of harassment here because sometimes the office sexual harassment that we think of can become physical and because of the proximity, but now it's more, I don't know if it's subtle or not, but it's definitely not physical. Talk about some of the things that are happening.
Well, if you looked at this a few months ago, you would say it's all about politics. And so things just like wearing a Trump shirt or a Biden shirt was creating a lot of chaos. We've also got the things that have happened around social justice that continue on. And right now it's about mask wearing. You can really get people wound up just having a conversation about whether or not they are going to wear a mask. And, I don't think there's any shortage for topics for people to get upset about these days. And unfortunately, some people, no matter what you do, are going to light a fire and see who they can stir up. And those are the people that you really need to keep your eye on.
Yeah, and I guess this sort of circles back, as we like to say nowadays, to your point about managers and managing your people. I guess that also starts with laying out the expectations that even though we're meeting virtually on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, that we all need to remember our interpersonal rules here, right? That's got to be reinforced.
Yeah, every company needs to have core values that they hire and fire by. It sounds simple, but it's not. And to define those and to make sure that there are things that you can live by, that really makes the decision easy. But if it's not in place, you're going to have a tough time holding people accountable to it.
Joel, I wonder if there's any real empirical evidence of this or just your gut from being in this area of expertise with workplace culture. These Zoom meetings or Microsoft Team meetings, are we seeing more problems in this area the more people that are on a particular call? In other words, is it easier if you limit it to maybe 20 or 25 employees on a call at once rather than all 150 or 200 of us, something like that?
Well, that'll definitely make a difference. I mean, we all experienced trying to talk over one another over a Zoom call, so the smaller groups are better. The thing that people are calling Zoom fatigue is a real thing too that can exacerbate some of these other issues we're talking about. In that, if you're on a Zoom call all day, every day, you're going to actually become more tired and more frustrated than you would if you were sitting in a room with other people. And a lot of that is due to the hyper focus that you have on yourself and other people while you're just staring at the screen. It's just not natural, right? And I think we've all gotten more comfortable with the technology, but we have not yet figured out how to handle the soft side of things. And I'm sure there are some tools coming that will help us with that help define or read people's movements and face mannerisms to determine what kind of mood they're in. But that's a ways off, and it feels a little 1984-ish as well. But you got to make sure that you're thinking about these things because this online world is definitely different than the one in person.
Joel Patterson's a workplace culture analyst. He heads up the Vested Group. Joel, final thought here. I think you sort of presaged it with your comment earlier. The thought was, I think, in the first few months of the pandemic that, hey, all these virtual meetings and stuff, this is all better and we can have less office space and all of this. But now we're finding maybe there are pitfalls we weren't aware of. Do you think that people are now thinking, maybe the old way was just as good?
Mix. I think that most companies, the numbers say about 2/3 of companies are going to have at least a partial work from home strategy as we move forward. So it's clear that entire decision has changed, and there are going to be steps taken to make sure that people can work from home. But I still, people want to be around each other, and they miss their colleagues, and they miss being able to develop rapport with people. And sometimes it's even important for their job if they're in a sales role and they need to be able to sit across from the table to talk to people. So it's going to ultimately become some kind of hybrid, but I think we'll get better at it as long as people are intentional and make sure that your people feel valued. That's the most important thing.
And for managers, make sure you're paying attention to these things on these big meetings that you're doing virtually because there could be problems brewing. Joel Patterson, a workplace culture analyst. Good stuff this morning. We appreciate your time.
Thank you. Always great.